Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my reaction channel. My name is Teddy90 and today we're going to be reacting to the 2010s, a reflection back on a wacky decade by Alternate History Hub. This is the first time I've had Alternate History Hub on this channel. I've watched his content many times before on my own, but never actually on this channel. So we're going to experience this for the first time together. I haven't watched this video either, so we're going to be experiencing this together as well. Cody, Alternate History Hub, the guy that we're watching, Cody, has a very interesting perspective on things. So I wonder where his perspective on the 2010s is going to come from. To make a few predictions, I have a feeling he's going to focus heavily on the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, and then the wave of disinformation that really started in 2016. I have a feeling those are going to be two big highlights. I'm not sure what else would really... And Trump obviously getting elected, but that came with the disinformation campaign. Yeah, those are my two predictions for what he's going to focus on, but I don't really know. Before we get started, go subscribe to the channel and go like this video and everything else like that. He deserves all the love, happiness, and support that you can possibly give him. I'm just some guy. But now let's just jump into it. Let's see.
Well, that was quite the decade.
We have breaking news tonight. At least 80 people.
The United States is conducting an operation
Is that Hannibal Buress? Or Hannibal Buress, or whatever his name is? The guy, what show is he a part of? He's with that, really weird guy. Can't remember now. Anyway. It really was a hell of a decade, wasn't it? Like, a lot of shit happened during this decade, if you really think about it. Like, a lot of things happened. Like, that's true for pretty much every decade, let's be real. But this decade, it was a doozy, especially at the end. The end of this decade was a doozy. The last, like, 4 years was just like, wow. Things got so much worse so much faster than anybody ever thought they could. And that's not even because of Trump. It's just everything spiraled rapidly out of control. Just in an insane manner. It was awesome to watch in a horrible sort of way, but it was awesome to watch.
In the span of all of human history, a decade is just the blink of an eye. But as you know, for us living in that time, it sure does feel a lot longer. At the start of the 2010s, the smartphone was only 3 years old. Memes looked like this, and the internet, while existing in the 2000s, was now accessible to such a large portion of the global population. Things were about to get weird. Looking back on certain
mass public unrest, social media. Woo! Whoa! Mass public unrest. Back yeah. Yeah, those two really went hand in hand.
On certain decades with context, we always like to put our own themes on what those decades meant.
Chaos. This decade was chaos. It was all of us realizing how much the internet truly fucks with things. And then by the end of the decade, it's like, wow, the internet is just, oh my god. Just disinformation everywhere. Just lies everywhere. Like, you can't shake a stick on the internet without hitting a lie. I somehow muted it. Oops.
World. We always like to put our own themes on what those decades meant. For America, World War II, civil rights in Vietnam, a mistake but with terrorists.
Now watch this drive.
Can we really put the 2010s into such a summary after such a short amount of time being away from it? Now with the full knowledge of hindsight from decades in the future, but I'm going to damn well try. If you're from the future and say at the end of this video, well, that wasn't accurate at all, well, sorry, I don't live in 2031. Go back to your crippling VR addiction. As a society, our view of certain time periods transforms over time.
Yeah.
With hindsight, past events that might seem good at the time can eventually bite us in the ass. Or those we think are horrendous now might not be the worst thing ever in the future.
Jimmy Carter!
He's history's greatest monster!
That said, who cares? I'm going to do it anyway. So sit down, grab some popcorn, pour your liquor of choice as we try to break down what the...
I don't have liquor. I have, like a good Canadian boy, I have a weed vape stick thing. Like a good Canadian boy.
the hell this last decade was about.
Insanity. Yeah, no. The US was losing power long before Trump got in. It really, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you saw this weird rise of a certain kind of politician that kind of forgot about the idea that the US wasn't always going to be a hyperpower forever and ever. Like a breed of politician came up that truly believed that the USA was the number one power forever and ever and ever and ever, and could never ever be challenged, and could never ever fall, even though the Soviet Union only, in real terms, fell very short time ago. I think they fell in the 90s. So that was only 30 years, not even. Just 30 plus years that the US has been a hyperpower, and now that they're falling off again, but it bred this weird kind of politician that was like, no, we can do whatever the hell we want without any consequence. And now we're really starting to feel the fact that no, that's not how global politics works. That's not how global politics ever worked. You had a mild golden age, but that doesn't mean the golden age would have lasted forever. You were high. And now we're coming to the fact that no, the US isn't the hyperpower, and it is very quickly weakening.
In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. As the 90s rolled in, the Soviet Union no longer existed. NATO, and more specifically the United States, found themselves as the sole power on Earth. A new world order, as the first President Bush called it. Conflicts became smaller, individual dictators became targets. And even though the US went headfirst into the war on terror, invaded two countries, and needed to rebuild them,
Who killed Hannibal?
for those 2 decades, America was still the sole power to do whatever it wanted. Its enemies were rogue dictators or faceless terrorist threats. So why do I bring this up? For 20 years, the United States was unrivaled. Russia was rebuilding after the collapse of communism, and China was rebranding itself. Yet by the 2010s, that new world order, post-Cold War type of dynamic, had came to an end. Russia was now an oligarchy led by a strongman flexing his muscles in Eastern Europe and Syria. China had shifted into authoritarian capitalism and modernized since the 90s. The US, in a way, squandered a brief period of time where it was unrivaled, and by the last decade, its dumb actions could be exploited by other new major powers. The lesson we can all take away from the 2010s is that the further the decade progressed, the less influential the United States became globally. While Trump by 2016 certainly didn't help this regression of American influence, he wasn't the cause of it. Nobody could have prevented America's decline internationally. The only reason America was at the top in the first place was because her only rivals, just like in World War II, were rebuilding themselves.
I'm healed!
And the 2010s is when we go back to the same normal script. Influence needs to be spread, and proxies compete with one another. And there's been no better time to start a new rivalry than when the world itself starts off the decade in turmoil.
Oh golly gee, I sure am glad to have survived that last decade.
Sponsors immediately. Yeah. He really hits us on the head. It wasn't Trump's fault. As much as I'll be honest, I don't like Trump. This America falling off its horse was not because of him. It was the insanity that was America. I'm Canadian, by the way. The insanity that was America invading the Middle East and wasting so much time and wasting so much resources on nothing. They didn't even invest in themselves. They didn't invest in infrastructure. They didn't invest in social welfare programs or anything. They invested it in a military budget to fight a battle overseas that they had no need to fight. There's no purpose to fight that war other than to give money to the military industrial complex, which really has come back to bite America in the ass. It wasted time. It wasted goodwill by declaring war on people who didn't deserve war declared upon them, like the Afghanis. It just wasted time, and now the current breed of American politicians seem to have this. Well, there's two current breeds of American politicians. Well, two main ones, you see. There's the ones that still believe with all their heart that they need to, or that they still are, number one, and that they can do whatever the hell they want. That are stuck in the fall of the Soviet Union mindset, that there is no power that can rival them. They can do no wrong. And there's a new breed of American politicians, which is just as interesting in my mind, that is on the rise, which is the isolationists. The Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens, other people like them, who believe that political isolation and stopping being the world's police and just going back to America is the way to do it, which is an interesting take on American policy, because if America does truly pull back entirely to its borders, which in all honesty it has the right to do, right? It has the right to not be the world's police. If it does pull back entirely away from all the places it's currently built, it currently has stations and it's currently at wars with, Russia or China will move in, and that'll be an interesting new world dynamic. The U.S. is on this interesting precipice right now, and it'll be interesting to see which direction the United States decides to take. Trump is a wild card. No one really knows what he's going to do. So all he's doing is he's very much in the mindset of America can do no wrong, and it can do whatever the hell it wants. Bernie Sanders is in the isolationist demographic, and the people who aren't doing so well in the Democratic primary, like Biden and Klobuchar and all those other people, Bloomberg doesn't count, are of the old mindset of, like, there's this weird mixture of America can do no wrong, but also we need to play the more diplomatic game, but they don't have a chance to win. So really, the race is really coming down to, at least during this current election, isolationism or American exceptionalism. This next election is going to be fascinating for more reasons than just social policies or I dislike Trump or I dislike Bernie or whatever. You have two very different ways of looking at the world, and it'll be fascinating to see which one America chooses.
Now I can just sit down and browse the internet in the comfort of my own home.
It is I, the Identity Bandit. I'm here to steal your face and wreck up the place.
Oh no, how could I have been so careless to let my guard down and not lock my door?
Ha 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 ha.
Has this situation ever happened to you? Hi, I'm Sponsorship Cody. When going online, it's always a possibility.
I like letting ads run. They get money from this, so I let the ads run. I'm assuming this is a VPN of some kind.
Subject to the
I have
rules
NordVPN personally.
of the internet. This video was sponsored by
Hey!
NordVPN. If you click the link in the description.
I do actually have NordVPN. Do I currently have it here? Yeah, right here. I don't have it on right now, but I do currently have NordVPN. You can see I haven't used it in a while because it was like you need to update. But yeah, I currently have NordVPN as well. It's a good one.
NordVPN now for 70% off a 3-year
I use it mostly for when I stream, if you're curious.
plan, plus 1 additional month free. But Coney, what even is it? I'm glad you asked, you faceless husk. NordVPN is a virtual private network that allows you to protect your identity online. Just pick one of the thousands of servers they have in over 60 countries, and you can use the internet in peace, keeping your IP address absolutely safe.
But I'm from a repressive regime, you say. No worries. NordVPN can bypass those pesky firewalls in censorship-friendly countries. Go to nordvpn.com/.
They also have double VPN if you want to be super secure. All I found really with that one is that it slows down your internet a lot. There's also Onion over VPN if you want to use the dark web. That's a thing you can do. What else? Yeah, you can pick different countries. Generally, you want to pick a country closer to you, just so your internet doesn't fucking lag into the ground. But I use it for streaming just so I don't get, like, swatted or something stupid. Use at your own discretion. VPNs. Although I didn't use his code or anything. I just got it on my own like 2 years ago, but I guess I'm helping his sponsorship thing because I use it. I don't know, whatever.
And use the code ALTHIST, and you can get NordVPN now for 70% off a 3-year plan, plus 1 additional month free. Well, no-face Jimmy, my time on this earth is very short, and the video is about to continue. Best of luck in your troubles. Thanks, Cody. I'll have to figure out how to breathe.
Good Christ, this video is 6 minutes in. 6.5 minutes in, and I've been blabbering for 16 minutes already. Jesus. I will stop talking.
When the decade began, the Great Recession was still in full swing. Unemployment had rose, the housing market in the US had crashed, and governments across Europe were becoming bankrupt. This was the first instance we see in the 2010s of major protests and riots becoming the mainstream. Tea Party protests, Occupy Wall Street.
But what are they protesting? Nobody seems to know. They were happy to take some time from their books, banjos, bongos, sports drinks. So do you know that taxpayers actually made money on the Wall Street?
Begin her career as a financial analyst for Goldman Sachs.
Sports drinks. So do you know that taxpayers actually made money on the Wall Street bailout? Seriously.
But those protests were nothing compared to what was to come.
Here, use this.
Yeah, Arab Spring.
While the revolutions themselves only lasted for about a year or so,
the
the ramifications dominated the decade. The Arab Spring was the most influential event of the 2010s. It all began in 2011. Tunisia successfully had their own revolution that ended in a better government compared to the last regime. And just like every wave of rebellion, everyone else wanted to try the same thing against their own corrupt leaders. At the time, it was seen as this great awakening where the Middle East might form democracies on their own.
Who discriminates against them? We're going to fix all those things in Egypt by telling the armed forces, number one, we need you to step aside now because we, the people, should rule Egypt, not the military.
Okay.
Well, dictators aren't prone to change. Who knew? Militaries fired on protesters, protesters fired back, and wouldn't you know it, we have civil wars. Libya is nothing more than the world's biggest battle royale today, where tribes, militias, and now Turkey fight over the coastline. Slavery is now one of its biggest industries.
Yeah.
Now have the opportunity to determine their own destiny in a new and democratic Libya.
Yeah.
Egypt has gone through various regimes before settling on a military dictatorship. The Gulf states shut down their protests pretty quick, but Syria was different. Syria was in such a unique,
still burning,
as in terrible position compared to the other Arab states. It was deeply tied to Russia and Iran.
But what is Aleppo? For those of you who remember that.
Iraq, which the US had just got a majority of its troops out of, and so every major power had a vested interest in how this particular war turned out. This wasn't just a civil war anymore. It was a good old-fashioned proxy war, one that exploded into a war against ISIS, perpetuating the conflict even longer. And in the end, Assad will still probably win. Even though I'm going to talk about the ramifications that occur mostly for the West, I cannot stress enough how much this has altered the fate for millions of people across the Middle East, all due to pretty short revolutions that occurred a decade ago. The effects of Syria spread out like an ash cloud. There were a lot of them, but I think these are the most important ones. One, the refugee crisis that immediately came from the fighting spread into Europe, sparking a debate on immigration, border security, and new right-wing movements across the continent. This wasn't just from Syria, but also from the collapse of Libya, where smugglers could now operate freely, ferrying migrants across the Mediterranean into Italy, causing an entirely separate crisis, which was also combined with the rise of ISIS. ISIS was not Al-Qaeda. They were able to grow from both Iraq and Syria's collapse into an actual territory with enforced borders. Granted, most of this land was just desert connected by small towns, but it was still enough to inspire Muslims from, most importantly, Western countries to either join the group or commit terrorist acts on behalf of the group. Attacks only created more fuel to the fire and deepened resentment. Luckily, it seems like with the defeat of ISIS as a military force, the attacks have stopped, or at least Europe is doing a better job at counterterrorism. That doesn't matter though, because now we have
Brexit.
the EU's perceived failure to at least regulate the refugee crisis from the 2010s and fears from the previous terrorist attacks. This caused a new influx of people wishing.
To be fair, for the EU, there was no real way to stop the refugee crisis. Unless you want to be completely inhuman and shoot them as they onto the border or whatever, or sink their boats or other things like that. You're kind of forced to take them. And with any refugees moving anywhere, there's this whole period of assimilation that occurs. And it usually takes 20 to 30 years to actively, like, get anywhere with the assimilation. So we're only beginning that process. And there was a lot of refugees. And refugees, no fault to the refugees, wanted to stop in the first place they landed, the first place they felt safe, because they were trying to provide for their families. And because the first places that they generally stopped were Italy, Hungary, Croatia, like all the different Balkan states, Turkey, Italy because they're crossing the sea, other places like that, Greece, the places that were first hit pretty much got overloaded. So a lot of them, even if they were trying to maintain, a lot of them ended up shoving on the refugees to other people. It became chaos. And you can't really blame the EU for trying to spread it out as much as they could, because it was a massive crisis. But people don't like things forced on them ever. I mean, for God's sake, America had a revolution because of fucking taxes. Very complicated situation. As much as I'm for refugees and for helping refugees, I understand the chaos that came from it and the disinformation that came from it. Because I'm going to be real, my main takeaway from this decade was that disinformation was the king of this decade. Lies and social media became the king of this decade. Brexit was built on lies. Everything the Brexiteers said were lies. So much of what's happening in America right now is based off of lies and misinformation. If you look at what's happening in Australia and the Conservative government there, how they are adamantly denying climate change and other things like that, or even just now recently starting to try climate change because everyone hates them now. Disinformation and lies from the media, and disinformation and lies online, and you see anti-vaxxers that come up because of disinformation and lies. This decade was based on disinformation and lies.
To leave the EU entirely. Because of this
means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
That future is only open to us with independence.
Unintended result of the Arab Spring was Scottish independence.
It's shite being Scottish!
With each of these situations, they were all influenced by that one origin point. And it's a good summation of what internationally the decade really was. One of unrest, protest, and political upheaval. In many ways, it
Is that
was
the XR?
one of
No, okay.
unrest, protest, and political
Thought that was the
upheaval.
XR symbol.
In many ways, like the 1970s. Speaking of the 70s,
2010s were basically the 70s.
Oh boy, America in the 2010s. What a ride it has been. How would Americans in the future view the 2010s? This is going to be quite the hot take. But for the United States as a whole, I think the 2010s was actually a drastic improvement compared to the 2000s.
Did he just say, aye, he did?
Yes, I know, this is heresy. How could you say that? I think the common mentality surrounding the 2010s being shit is mostly because the main demographic of the internet is younger people. People who would have been very young or kids during the 2000s.
I'm
and as
among
with
them,
anybody
yeah, I
looking
was
back
young.
on their childhood, they see those simpler, better times. But these were not simpler times. Even as a kid, I remember playing stuff like Mario Sunshine, while the news in the background talked about the latest casualties in Iraq. Despite the technological advancements, the 2000s for the country kinda sucked. 9/11 literally catapulted the nation into two different wars. Katrina destroyed New Orleans, the stock market collapsed in 2008. The entire country felt like it was just in a state of depression, and maybe that's reflective in the media of the time. If any one of those events happened during the age of social media, you would think that the world is ending. While in the 2010s, we are more politically divided, there is more extremism. I think it was actually a far better decade overall for the United States domestically compared to the 2000s. The recession came and went, Bin Laden was killed, we at least got most of the troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of the negative events that occurred to the United States in the 2010s were simply aftershocks from the cluster that was the 2000s. I think that the 2010s will be seen as a transition period. A shift from the War on Terror 2000s to whatever the 2020s will bring. The focus of the country is moving onto other spaces. Competition with Russia and China as those powers grow. With the United States no longer the sole dominant power, situations like Iraq are hopefully a thing of the past. I said hopefully. I said got!
Any topic probably not age well. True. I'm sure you're lighting us all in the comments.
When I ask people what they think the 2010s will be remembered for, a lot of the responses I got boiled down to memes or social media. And I think these answers aren't actually that far off. The memes themselves won't be remembered. They'll be looked back on with the same fondness we have for Rage comics.
Off to hang myself, horse and left.
And social media is here to stay. It won't be unique to just the 2010s. But the 2010s will be remembered for being the first decade where the masses themselves could interact easily with one another on a global scale. And the reasons for that are simple. Technology that was expensive in the 2000s became cheaper. The internet gained better infrastructure. It's almost weird to think about today, but the last decade saw a revolution in how people interact with one another. Before the 2010s, the internet was prominent. Sites like Twitter and Facebook existed, but their populations were small. By the start of 2010, Facebook had just reached 500 million viewers. Only 3 years earlier, it didn't even have a tenth of that. While 500 million is a lot, it's nothing compared to the 2 billion it is today. Twitter was even smaller, having only 50 million users in 2010, and while it exploded over the decade as well, it kind of plateaued out with 350 million. Oof, Twitter, you in trouble, buddy? Why aren't you showing your viewer growth anymore? What was once an interesting way of communicating soon grew into a major influence in every person's life, even if you've never logged onto a social media site in your life. Social media is a tool. At its most basic, it's just an easy way to say something for anybody to see.
I mostly just use
when
Reddit.
anybody can say anything, things get wacky. Not only were these sites a simple way to talk to others, but to share articles, information, receive news as soon as it happens. Hey, this thing is great. Hey, this thing isn't great. That cycle of information, and well, traditional journalism collapsed.
Yeah.
The fourth estate is a term to describe the power that journalists and news media have to keep the power.
I'm glad he touched on it. But yeah, this would be my main takeaway. I do get that the Arab Spring caused a lot of things, but I do think that this is truly the biggest thing of this decade. But
was of government in check by informing the citizens. The way citizens have received news and information has always evolved, but throughout that whole time, having an informed audience was seen as a necessity to a functioning democracy. The newspaper itself has been dying for a while, even before social media, all thanks to 24-hour news. And ever since the 80s, anything a newspaper prints the next day would already have been milked to death by the previous day's rounds of CNN and Fox News. And this was already a pretty big problem, because while cable news was a faster way of knowing the news, it's not ethical at all, because actual news doesn't happen that much. And you can't simply talk about nothing because you have to keep viewers watching until the commercials. A fundamental part of an informed democracy, the Fourth Estate, for decades has become corrupted by ratings and keeping viewers watching for those dumb ads. And by 2010, social media blew up. The internet became the final nail in the coffin to newspapers. Cable news and internet sites both operate under the same mentality: clicks and views. The Fourth Estate died in the 2010s. It will not be replaced by anything except a free-for-all of misinformation and personal bias driven by conversations of people themselves, as people will just read a headline.
Yeah, even CNN, Fox News, and all those other places are dying because of just the ability to get information instantaneously. There's this weird, as he said, it's a free for all. It's crazy out there, and it really defined the last half of this decade. Like it really did. Like social media defined the first half. Social media and the power of social media, and then the second half would be the apex of social media and the start of disinformation and the death of traditional media. Traditional media has already died. It just hasn't really realized it yet. Like, no one under 30 watches TV anymore. Like, watches cable TV anymore. It basically just doesn't happen. All traditional news sites are basically fucked. I have no idea what's going to replace it, and it'll be interesting to see what does. But the free-for-all that is the internet has won. The 2010s was the internet decade. It was the internet decade. And it showed in the utter chaos of us getting used to the fact that this is actually a force in our lives. Going into the 2020s, we are well aware of just how much shitstorm the internet can cause, and hopefully we'll understand it better, realize we shouldn't trust anything we see anywhere, ever, and go in as more informed people into the 2020s. And I think we are. I do truly think we are. I think even with like you see this with the coronavirus, very few people are panicking. We're getting information pretty quickly, things like that. Like, we aren't listening to the traditional, like, panic-based media that's out there or anything like that, because we're really starting to realize that it's like we need to just look at the facts and keep calm and don't fuck about. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with that. I had points. Now I've lost those points. I'll let him talk.
On a feed, get the general idea, and scroll down, leading to a future where there is no institution with an ethical code, but instead the people are informed from small bits of information on a feed. And now is an era of mob rule by social opinion.
Yep.
This is why, at least online, using politics as an example, it seems like the political divide has gotten so much worse. For the 2010s, we saw the general public begin to be more easily misinformed, and the most extreme information is the one that's the most shared. Protests, riots, fights in the streets. Social media is a tool, and if used irresponsibly, this last decade has taught us, if nothing else, it can cause chaos.
What was that?
Last decade has taught...
Only a new law where females are equally distributed among men. Fucking incels.
this.
Now this is something I wanna. I had this idea bouncing around my head where I go onto incel forums and react to the different fucking craziness there. I might start doing that just to give myself a good giggle. Anyway, I'll continue going.
It can cause chaos. Just a couple private citizens hold so much sway over the information that influences real-world events. In fact, a few companies controlling so much of what we see and hear really does seem to be an increasing theme. Reminds me of, oh no. But that's a story for another time. The way we view the past is determined on the values that we hold in the present. Were the 2010s a revolution in technology, where people can now communicate with others from around the globe? Or was it a time of divide, where the people began to politically fracture, only spurred on more by false information led by unethical companies? Was it the rise of a new type of extremism caused by online bubbles and disillusioned new generations coming into a job market where wages have stagnated? Or was it simply an aftershock following the earthquake that was the 2000s? A rough transition to a better time. All of these views are valid, because right now we don't know what the events that occurred in the 2010s will evolve into. For me, I believe these main themes. Internationally, the world saw a new awakening of former global powers. The 20-year period of American dominance following the end of the Cold War has concluded. For the West, the refugee crisis and economic fallout from the Great Recession created an era of protest and extremism. All of this was fueled by a technological revolution in communication, social media, and the maturing of the internet, allowing for protest and the inevitable fallout of such a thing in some areas of the world, leading to much greater disasters than anyone at this time can imagine. Keep in mind, this view is from a recent mindset. Who knows how this will change? And it will change. History is always on a branching road. It all depends on which path we go down to determine the perspective we'll view, what we left behind. So how will we view the 2010s in the future? Let's see how the future goes.
That was a great video. That was a great video. It really gets you thinking about the way the world is going to progress. Like, disinformation will always be there. But at least in my mind, it feels like we're getting better with it. I don't know, though. I'll have to think about this more. I'm now in thinking about it mode instead of talking about it mode, where I'm trying to process. Probably a great time to end the video, then. If you enjoyed this video, go like and subscribe to Alternate History Hub. He deserves everything. He deserves all the love and support that it's possible. Go support NordVPN, I guess. Go use his code. It'll give him money. NordVPN's okay. I don't know. I haven't used any others, so I can't really speak for it. In comparison. If you enjoyed my particular commentary based on this, it's not really even a reaction. It's a commentary. Let's be real. If you enjoyed my commentary, give me a like, give me a sub, all that other good stuff. Is there anything else I want to say at the end of this? Not really. Oh yeah, I was thinking about maybe doing, making fun of incels. You'll see a video of that, posting at some point. And it'll be hilarious. Or incredibly disappointing. I don't really know which. Anyway, I've been me. You've been you. Love, butts, and happiness and all that other good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Where's the fucking off button?